We need to be the party of nationalism. And I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian. Where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband.
We are Americans, and Americans kneel to God and God alone.
This is Sacred Politics, Episode 2, The Future of Christian Nationalism. White Christian nationalism has been infiltrating American politics for generations, but it's never been as visible as it is today. Our political leaders tout the dangerous agenda on campaign stops, unflinching in their commitment to push America back in history rather than forward. Why wouldn't they? It gets them crucial votes and a cult-like following.
Some will say now that I am calling America a Christian nation. And so I am. Some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism, and so I do.
Look, there's no such thing as evangelicals for Harris, right? This is an oxymoron. This is, this is no different. Other people have said this. It's Jews for Hitler, right? I mean, this is really what we're talking about here.
I don't have to honor your religion. I don't have to give you freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is there for us to worship Jesus. It's not for you to come force anything else upon me. And so we had that all wrong, and we've had tolerance. We've been politically correct. And at what point are we going to say, nope, we're not going to be? You can do whatever you want to in the comfort of your home. You can do whatever you want to, but don't come into my government and bring any of that trash in there. And we shouldn't be electing anyone in government, local, state, or federal, that is not a Christian.
And there's no one that encapsulated this movement quite like former President Donald Trump, who has made himself the face of white Christian nationalism.
Christians are under siege. Religion and Christianity are the biggest things missing from this country, and I truly believe that we need to bring them back, and we have to bring them back fast. I think it's one of the biggest problems we have. That's why our country is going haywire. We've lost religion in our country. All Americans need a Bible in their home, and I have many. It's my favorite book. It's a lot of people's favorite book. This Bible is a reminder that the biggest thing we have to bring back America and to make America great again is our religion. Let's make America pray again. God bless you, and God bless the USA.
Trump rallies are looking more and more like evangelical revivals. He does the call and response stuff that you will see if you go to an evangelical revival. The way that he is positioning himself, I am your redemption, I am your vengeance, all of that is like very fire and brimstone Christian nationalist language.
Jess McIntosh is a political strategist and a commentator that has been working in politics for 20 years, from campaigning at every level, from school board to United States president on Hillary Clinton's campaign. Since 2016, they have been focused on speaking about issues of message and audience and getting into some of those thornier questions about why things are the way they are right now in American history.
He knows exactly what he's doing. And that's the energy that he's courting, and that's what would put him back in office if he winds up doing that.
Donald Trump is closer to a televangelist than a polished politician. With his divisive campaign speeches and viral insults, he can rile up his audience and make good television in one foul swoop. He treats his campaign and former presidency more like a reality TV show than the highest office in our government. It's easy for us to call it ignorant or mindless, but it's a strategic choice, whether we want to admit it or not. Appealing to evangelical voters has worked well for him. It won Trump one election, and it has the power to win him another. By adopting the issues that drive the Christian nationalist movement as his own, such as abortion bans, immigration, and traditional family values, Trump gained the support of 8 in 10 white evangelical Christians in 2020, according to an AP Votecast.
And you see that same theme coming around big time, in this protracted, horrible election of just Trump really embracing the Christian right. He's talking about homeschooling. He's talking about bringing back Christianity. He's talking, he's applauding the 10 Commandments, and he's selling Bibles, $59.99 a pop, special autographed Bibles.
I think you all should get a copy of God Bless the USA Bible Now and help spread our Christian values with others. There you have it.
That was Talia Lavin, an American journalist and the author of Cultural Warlords, where Talia delves into the digital world of white supremacy as a Jewish woman. In her forthcoming book, Wild Faith, How the Christian Right is Taking Over America.
If you look at a lot of Christian right rhetoric around the 2016 election and the 2020 election, the most common comparison you see from a lot of pretty high-profile evangelical preachers and on, these very large platforms like the Christian Broadcasting Network, is they compare him to Cyrus the Great, who was a Persian king who allowed the Jews to return to Promised Land to build their second temple. He was God's tool, God's flawed vessel. And you have a lot of people comparing Trump to Cyrus, saying, oh, he's God's flawed vessel. He may be sort of sinful in these ways. And the idea is, okay, he may have this impious appearance, but he's going to get our will done. And you very much see that the religious right priorities become the Trump administration's priorities.
Some believe that Trump was chosen by God, fulfilling a biblical prophecy. For these believers, it doesn't matter that Trump doesn't embody traditional moral family values. His presidency has been viewed as part of a divine plan, interpreted through the lens of end times theology. Every action he took was seen as a step toward the prophesied end of the world. This belief was further fueled by Trump's televangelist-like speeches, endorsements from prominent evangelical leaders, and a cultural narrative casting him as a defender against secularism and moral decline. According to Pew Research Center, 27% of U.S. adults believe that Trump's 2016 election was part of God's plan, regardless of whether they supported his policies. This conviction only deepened after the failed assassination attempt at a Pennsylvania rally in July.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here. Yeah. I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God. Many people say it was a providential moment. Probably was.
2 days ago, evil came for the man we admire and love so much. I thank God that his hand was on President Trump.
God Almighty intervened because America is one nation under God, and he is certainly not finished with President Trump.
To be clear, not all Christians are Christian nationalists. Far from it. Countless Christians use their faith to fuel their positive activism, pushing back against the movement that's hijacked their faith and used their religion as an excuse for their harmful actions. But no matter how you feel about Trump, it can't be denied that his presidency delivered nearly everything his evangelical base could have hoped for.
It played an enormous role in 2016, and a different role than normal, because you had Donald Trump, who is, of course, in addition to working in politics for 20 years, I'm also a New Yorker. So I grew up with Donald Trump, and that's not a Christian. He was a playboy. That was his whole shtick. He was vocally pro-choice. He was vocally pro-LGBT. He's always been racist, did not flip on that for national politics' sake. But, he was sort of famously libertine in his ideas, not a churchgoer. So when he ran in 2016, it's actually a very illustrative thing that happened, because he had to marry the two factions of the Republican Party, which are pro-business, pro-wealth, and the Christian nationalist side. And he did that in a very transparent way. And he did it by offering the Christian nationalist side the Supreme Court. And he did this out loud. He did this in public. He did it in interviews. He made it very clear. He said that he had a litmus test, that he would not appoint any justice who was not approved by the Federalist Society. And the Federalist Society is a Christian nationalist group. The people who come out of that are the Alitos, the Kavanaughs, the Amy Coney Barretts, the extreme hardliners on religion. So he got that Christian nationalist faction of the Republican Party to be okay with this famous libertine, I cheat on all of my wives, I don't care about abortion, I don't pay my contractors, I go into bankruptcy all the time and lie about it. Like, these are not Christian values, right? But he got this very, very powerful faction of the Republican Party to accept his candidacy by saying, I'm going to give you what you want most. And what you want most is a Christian nationalist Supreme Court. And that is what we have right now.
During his 4 years in office, Trump appointed 3 conservative Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, cementing a conservative majority on the court. At the state level, Trump also appointed over 200 conservative federal judges, reshaping the judiciary system for decades to come. These appointments have had profound and devastating consequences, from the overturning of Roe v. Wade to the legal battles over Trump's own crimes. The conservative Supreme Court has steadily eroded foundational aspects of our democracy, turning once fringe beliefs into the new norm. They're delivering everything Christian nationalist voters want on a silver platter. In return, Trump gets their unwavering devotion.
For as long as I've known President Trump, I've found him to be a man of his word. Things that he said he'll do, he did. When he told me and our country in 2016 that he was going to appoint conservative justices, guess what? He did.
And he has kept every promise he made to the faith community. I really do love and appreciate that man.
He makes deals. That's his whole thing. He made the deal went through, and he delivered. So now we have this very reactionary, very activist, very Christian nationalist court that is ruling in a way that goes directly opposite to how the majority of Americans feel when it comes to reproductive freedom, when it comes to voting rights, all kinds of things. The church has been the tool for social organization in the Republican Party for a very, very long time. Basically, Democrats don't have a sort of secular alternative like that. We sort of organize around political campaigns, largely to our detriment. Republicans have historically been better at organizing around local issues, largely because they have churches. They have community gathering places already. Now, churches should be separate from politics, yes, but only one side believes that, and that's not the side that's using the churches.
By utilizing the influence of pastors and televangelists in their congregations, evangelical voters and politicians have a disproportionate amount of influence on American politics. We see it every day, from Supreme Court decisions such as Dobbs versus Jackson or Trump versus United States to the election of Marjorie Taylor Greene and other infamously vocal officials, including our Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who had a flag associated with the Christian nationalist movements and the January 6th Capitol insurrection displayed outside his office, and rejects the belief that the separation of church and state is a constitutional principle.
We're a pretty socially liberal country. Like, the vast majority of us are absolutely cool with marriage equality. We don't want to see trans people discriminated against. We absolutely believe in your own decisions when it comes to when and whether to grow your family. And those are not evangelical positions by any means. It has been exerting undue influence for so long that it's kind of impossible to overstate it.
White evangelical Protestants are 14% of the population. How do they hijack our priorities so intensely and have so much standing and have so much judicial support? And really, the answer is this is the fruit, this is the culmination, the apotheosis of a half a century of very dedicated political organizing.
None of this is new. We might be noticing the effects now, but that's only because they've had generations to put their plan into action.
I think it is crucial that you say that we're waking up to it, because the reality is it's been there for decades. As a historian, I look at this and one of the things we say as historians is everything has a history. So nothing we're seeing in this presidential election cycle or this current political climate in general is coming out of nowhere. There's a background to it and a trail. This has been a decades-long effort, much of it promulgated and propagated through churches.
Jemar Tisby is a New York Times best-selling author, national speaker, and public historian on a mission to deliver truths from the Black experience with depth and clarity. His perspectives on race, religion, history, and justice come from both study and experience, from coming to faith in a white evangelical setting to getting a PhD in history.
I think this helps actually give us some perspective. Why is it so hard? Why does the opposition seem to be so strong? Why do our efforts seem to be so ineffectual? It's because we're not just dealing with whatever the current headline is. We're dealing with that and the one before it and the one 10 years before it and 20 and 30 and 40 years before that. So there's a momentum that we're pushing back against that's very strong. And we shouldn't be discouraged when it doesn't look like we're making progress, because the odds stacked against us and the opposition we're facing is actually a lot bigger than what we can even see just right now.
Jemar is a lifelong Christian, but he began realizing that the Reformed evangelical theology that has been such a significant part of his Christian life didn't have answers to the issues most important to him. He couldn't find insight on the struggle of the Black community, or the topic of race or social justice at all. He dreamed of making space for Black people at the white, Reformed, and evangelical table. But he quickly discovered just how closely whiteness and the pursuit of power was tied with evangelicalism in the United States.
The white is always implied, whether you say Christian nationalist or white person. But I always try to remind people by making it explicit, because it can be really confusing, right? Because you see people using these same talking points and embracing this ideology who are not white. So how can it be that Black people, Latinos and Latinas, people of Asian descent, how can it be white Christian nationalism when you've got all these different people of color, races, ethnicities participating? Well, it's pretty simple. One, white supremacy has always drafted the support of the people it oppresses for legitimacy. Understand that's what's happening when they trot out, whatever person with whatever name or skin color or background. What they're doing is deploying that person strategically to deflect charges of racism. But in reality, you got to look at power and you got to look at money. That ain't changing. It really is important that we not forget the racial component here, because understand, this is a cohesive narrative. It's a bonkers narrative, but it's a cohesive narrative. Part of the narrative is who counts as a true American, a true American. As we think about what we can do in this moment, we look to people groups and oppressed groups who have had to build our own tables in order to resist different forms of injustice. So you ask, what have Black folks done? I mean, fundamentally, the Black Christian tradition is a way that we've built our own tables in the face of what Frederick Douglass called a slaveholder Christianity, a racist or white supremacist Christianity, a white Jesus Christianity, right? What the Black church represents is institution building and a counter narrative of white Christian nationalism. So you want to know what the inverse of white Christian nationalism is? It's the Black Christian tradition, which arose specifically in opposition to racism and white supremacy from a religious perspective.
It's impossible to separate race and white Christian nationalism. For over half a century, their policies, plans, and rhetoric have pushed a dangerous agenda that disproportionately harms historically marginalized communities.
If the white racial component is always to be assumed in white Christian nationalism, then what's the opposite in terms of a racial and social hierarchy? It's Black. So when you enshrine white Christian nationalism as the government, as the social structure, that is inherently and by default going to continue to suppress and oppress people who are labeled as Black, because it is the antithesis of what a quote unquote true American is. It is the antithesis of those who should be included or those who should have their rights. There are very frightening examples playing out right now of how white Christian nationalism is being harmful, in particular to Black people. One is the resistance to African American studies being taught, which more broadly is resistance to learning about the history and the impact of race in our nation. The Supreme Court decision to say that race couldn't be a factor in college admissions, overturning affirmative action efforts. So the attacks are already underway. And if they get the White House, if they get other offices and other levers of power, such as the courts, then those policies will be harder and harder to overturn, and they'll expand in their detrimental impacts for all people.
And it all comes to a head with Project 2025, the far-right extremist vision for America. It's a plan that has been formed by politically powerful allies and supporters of Donald Trump that he will implement if he wins a second presidential term in 2024, since Trump and his supporters are disappointed that he didn't make more permanent changes in our way of life in his first term. They blame government bureaucracy, federal agencies, and civil servants for limiting him. So they've taken the past 4 years to craft this plan to be ready on day one of another term. It is essentially a way for Trump to eliminate the checks and balances our government has in place so that he can successfully implement their regressive policies without Congress or federal agencies even getting involved. The 900-plus page document spells out their plan, step by step, word for word. It will embed their far-right extremist agenda so deeply that we can't get out of it for generations.
They're telling us their plan. And I think there's some strategy behind that, because here we are talking about it. And, it could be the philosophy of, any attention is good in marketing, right? So even if it's people railing against it, maybe it serves their purpose to spread the word.
The right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation, pulled together more than 100 co-sponsors who share an extreme conservative and white Christian nationalist vision for the future of America. This group created Project 2025 to serve as a blueprint for a future Trump administration. Many former Trump advisors and officials were involved, along with others who have successfully shaped conservative policies for previous past presidents. The 900-page document is full of disinformation and rambling, but here are some of its main pillars. Much of Project 2025 is based in Christianity and a biblical worldview. It aims to center that ideology in government and society and turn it into federal laws. The plan assumes that America is Christian and that Christianity and its beliefs should have a privileged place in society over other religions and civil laws. Project 2025 is shameless in its attack on human rights, particularly for LGBTQ+ people. The plan demonizes and potentially criminalizes transgender people and would prevent transgender people from serving in the military. It would remove federal protections for all LGBTQ+ people, allowing them to be fired for their sexual or gender identity. The plan suggests conversion therapy for LGBTQ+ people, and some of its language leans towards anti-surrogacy positions, which would impact LGBTQ+ family planning. And speaking of families, Project 2025 says that the U.S. government should maintain a biblically based definition of marriage and family, that of heterosexual two-parent families only. Donald Trump made it clear before his first term that they'd come for abortion if he could get Supreme Court justices seated, and that's exactly what happened. He proudly took responsibility for the fall of Roe v. Wade and subsequent abortion bans. Now they're telling us they'll do more, and they've already started, as we've seen with Congress's Life at Conception Act and Alabama's Supreme Court IVF ruling. Project 2025 also uses religious justification to demonize recreational sex and contraception. The plan calls for restricting our access to STD testing, birth control, and IVF. They also hope to create a private database of far-right loyalists who want to work for Trump. Think of it as an extremist LinkedIn. Their goal is to have at least 20,000 loyalists screened and ready to fill federal appointments throughout the government. We know the damage that just 3 of his appointees on the Supreme Court have done. Imagine what thousands of his appointees would do across federal agencies. These are just a few of the dangerous policies in Project 2025. But to learn more, we urge you to utilize the playbook linked in the episode description to avoid giving any undue attention to extremist views or clicks to their website. Project 2025 is a power grab. It's a plan to shift America away from democracy and towards authoritarianism by giving the president and his administration more power and ensuring that they can maintain it.
White Christian nationalists hope to accomplish nothing less than a theocracy, a Christo-fascist theocracy, which is simply another way of saying white Christian nationalism. Have you ever noticed that when Black Christians think about faith and politics in general, it leads to an expansion of democracy. It leads to the promotion of civil rights. And then when you think about white Christian nationalism, the inverse is true. They want to narrow access to the vote, whether through gerrymandering, ID laws, you can't pass out water while waiting in voting lines, whatever it might be. So all I'm saying is there are different ways to engage faith in politics, but what white Christian nationalists want to do is essentially create or recreate a very rigid social, political, and economic hierarchy that is going to leave most of us out rather than in. The real danger is they're going to use the legitimate levers of democracy to instill and install minority rule. And by minority, I mean a smaller number than the majority. Democracy fundamentally should operate according to the will of the people, the will of the majority of the people. But what white Christian nationalists want to do, who have completely taken over the Republican agenda, certainly at the national level, but I would argue also at the state and local level, what they want to do is use voting, use the political process to get in office. But once they're in there, they're going to install the people they want. They're going to remove the guardrails that protect democracy, protect the right to vote, protect the ability for one's voice to be heard in the political process. And then this is the danger. It's not one administration. It's not one politician. It's what they're going to do to the rules, to change the rules to keep them in power. That's what we really need to be concerned about. It's not just 2024 to 2028. It's what they do during that time to make sure that for generations, we're going to be fighting uphill just to regain the ground we thought we already had.
As you can see, all the talk and red flags around Project 2025 are justified. It is something to worry about, but it's also something that can motivate us. America is facing 2 very different futures depending on who is inaugurated as president in January 2025. There's the extremist, authoritarian future of America that Project 2025 envisions, and there is the democratic vision of America that we are working for.
I can't guarantee that we'll get out of this thing with a democracy intact. Nobody can guarantee that. So then the question is, what kind of people must we be? What kind of virtue and character must we cultivate in order not only to survive under that, but to resist that kind of authoritarian pressure and stripping of rights and work continually toward progress?
It can be very easy to feel totally helpless, totally paralyzed in the face of a very organized movement. But this is, again, like quite a small segment of the population that has very disproportionate power. But there are a lot of people with a lot of very intense stakes in theocracy not descending over 300 million people. Don't put the whole burden of overturning this rotten and theocratic system on your own shoulders, but just acknowledge that you should be doing something.
It literally is the work of relational organizing that's going to, just like it did in 2020, combat this absolutely terrifying rise. I mean, let's go back to where we all started. Like, that's what they're doing and what they have been doing for a couple of generations now, is using those community hubs of the church to politically organize. We don't use our churches that way. I think for very good reasons. One, it's not legal. And two, that's not how we conceive of our faith largely. But we do need community hubs. We do have to counter that somehow. And that means we have to work a little harder to create those spaces where people are talking about problems within their communities and possible solutions.
I don't want to sound trite and say, here's how we can find hope. I emphasize again and again and again, we don't know that we will win. We don't know that we'll lose, but we cannot pin our well-being and our hope on a certain candidate being elected, a certain policy being passed. I think you're setting yourself up for devastation. What I find gives me strength is a couple of things. Number one is learning about history, and particularly the people who resisted injustice. These are everyday folks. These are not, in general, some special class of people who had access to some special strength or knowledge. They were simply people who chose, in the face of fear, to try to do the right thing and the best they could where they were. And a lot of these folks are not operating on a national level. They're operating locally, which is the input I would give. And I'm just highlighting and underlining and amening everything y'all are saying, right? So much of this work is local. I've got the number of my congressperson right here on my desk, contacting them and being like, yo, what's up? Here are my concerns. Where do you stand on it? When they hear from their constituents, that's when they go to Washington, D.C. and Congress and say, well, my people are saying this. And guess where it started? It started with your email, your letter, your phone call locally, right? And then also, local folks have immense power, whether that's a city council, are we voting in those elections? Whether it's a county prosecutor, are we paying attention to who has the power to lock people up and for how long? So what I'm saying is a lot of national change comes from picking up on the momentum of folks like your listeners who are doing everyday stuff in their communities. Make it so there is an infrastructure and a platform that when the time comes can be deployed for the sake of justice and uplift and to form a more perfect union. But that's not going to happen spontaneously. And if not for your everyday efforts, we won't have that infrastructure in place, whether email lists, fundraising, contacting people, whatever it might be. We won't have that infrastructure in place when the time has come. But here's the other encouraging part. I mentioned before, the forthcoming book I have is called The Spirit of Justice. And it is about people who resisted injustice. It is about the folks who refused to quit and give up. And to me, that's the hope. The hope is not necessarily that this particular candidate will win or lose, this particular policy will pass or be repealed. The hope is that in every era, no matter what the odds or the obstacles, there are people who rise up to resist. And it will be a small group. It will not be a majority, history shows us. But all it takes is that small, committed group of people, like the folks listening today, who can truly make a difference and bend that arc of the moral universe toward justice. But it's going to take us pulling and bending it that way.
When people know that our freedoms and very democracy are at stake, the majority are on our side. So let's make sure we are talking to everyone we know about the importance of voting in 2024. Voting for candidates who share a vision for what America should be. And we can ensure that we still have a democracy that allows us to vote the next time elections come around. The good news is, Red, Wine, and Blue can give you the tools, resources, and guidance you need to effectively organize and engage in your own communities. Our Project 2025 guide and toolkit can be found in the episode description or at redwine.blue/Project 2025. Together, we can create lasting change. On the next episode of Sacred Politics,
The politicization of faith is turned off so many people from the church.
You know, all of us know that there's a lot of things that have used the name Christian, but they don't look or act much like Christ at all.
Religion, in its purest form, should be a conduit that will help people not only nurture a person's individuality and spirituality, but to help show them what it means to have this relationship with the divine.
Sacred Politics is hosted and narrated by Jill Jonasson, produced by Abigail Martin and Ashley Hufford, and written and edited by Abigail Martin.